you'll be like, oh, we'll save you $300,000. Your manager doesn't really care. Maybe it values velocity. Maybe, for example, you're in a startup where like money doesn't matter. It is like finding product market fit that matters, and like just you might burn as much money as possible until it works. In that mode, talking about like saving money doesn't really get you anywhere, right? And this is one of those insidious things. Someone delivers an MVP and then he says a class of problems are solved. But that MVP doesn't go to production. But at MVP delivery, it gets all of the credit for that complex work. But you that take it to production, you get no credit.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that does happen as well. So it's part of the thing where if that is what, like, somebody has to do MVP, another person has to do this thing.
Yeah.
What you want to do is make sure that what you're working on.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Build. Today we want to talk about the topic of getting promoted. There's so many aspects to it. There's so many parts to it. And we just want to kind of like talk about our personal experiences and talk through some things that went well, some things that didn't work well, you know. And yeah, I will let Okpe start. I think we're going to start with this, Okpe. Can you just walk me through the timeline of your promotion from when you became a software engineer at Zillow? I think you came in as a mid-level software engineer, right? To then getting promoted as a senior. And then hopefully when this comes out, you get the principal, but we'll see. But yeah, we'll see. But that timeline and that process of going from that mid-level engineer to being a senior engineer.
Oh yeah. I was a mid-level engineer for 2 years and a bit, but the other thing is I had like 7 years of experience in Nigeria. So when they leveled me as a mid-level, it reflected like the fact that I moved countries, but also it reflected that I was changing like my domain. I wasn't a data engineer, I was systems engineer before I became a data engineer. So I was learning the tools, but a lot of the other part I think I mostly added. Like I have like ridiculous amount of ownership. I've always had ownership since I was in Nigeria. I didn't have to learn how to own stuff or be responsible for something or like to manage communication. A lot of the non-hard skills, all of the soft skills, I already had them. So what I was showing to make that move from my mid-level to senior was more like, hey, hard skills of actually just delivering like data pipelines and high quality data to solve like business problems.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I started as entry level 59, straight out of college to Microsoft. And I think within a year, I was promoted to 60. But going from 59 to 60 at Microsoft isn't super hard. You just have to ask questions and just get stuff done, essentially, right? And when I say get stuff done, I mean just be useful to an extent, where if you're blocked, you're not just sitting on your hands for days, right? You're actually being proactive, and it's not even that, sorry. That's 60 to 61. So going from software engineer to going from 59 to 60 is just asking questions, literally. Just like, hey, how does this thing work? How does this thing work, right? You're essentially just trying to gather domain knowledge about that space. And then, you'll be working on tasks here and there. But then going from 60 to 61, which I think I did after another year, was then saying, okay, I can get stuff done, right? And then going from 61 to 62, which was then like, okay, you're getting things done, but you're doing it independently, right? They can give you this thing and then you go and figure out what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, who to reach out to, right? And then, I think through all of these processes, I've been privileged to have managers who kind of promote me before I even ask, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Like, I think Microsoft does a great job of empowering managers to take you to that next level if you're already performing at that next level, right? Which brings me to that point, right? I think one thing I have learned about the whole promotion thing is ultimately you have to be performing at that next level before they take you there, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
So I think that in tech generally, that's called the anti-Peter principle. So the way it works in like university or any other part of like just general life is you get promoted until you start to fail, right? So that's the principle, for want of a better word. The anti-Peter principle, on the other hand, is that you will not get promoted until we see you performing at that level. So you don't get promoted and then fail. You only get promoted if they know you will succeed at that level. Yeah. So like that's the thing that I think is very common in tech, but that's the thing that I think usually screws people up, because people are like, oh, I am very, very good at this level. Why don't I get promoted? Because like in school, you passed
The
grade
exam,
2,
yeah.
and then you get promoted to grade 3, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they want to see you do grade 3 work,
yeah.
and then they move you to grade 3.
Yeah.
And it's always very, very confusing. But like that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
with, like,
absolutely. Like you have to be doing the work, because ultimately when you're showing that you're ready for that next level, and you've maybe done maybe 2 or 3 things within that space, or you're performing at that level for some time, either you've delivered projects at that scale, or you have kind of like showed that you're able to own things, then they then take you to that next level, right? But I think ultimately the way you do those things actually matter, and it kind of like depends on your level, right? I think there's usually a doc within companies that show what is expected from you.
big companies.
Yes,
Only.
big companies. Yeah. At Microsoft, we had a doc. Well, at Microsoft in M365, there was the Rainbow doc. The Rainbow doc showed what was expected at you at every level for them to then say, okay, yeah, you're doing this. And the whole point was not for you to like hit everything on that level, right? But it was kind of used for you to kind of like gauge to say, okay, am I driving this thing end to end, right? And if you don't have the opportunities to show that you're doing some of those things, that's when you then need to go talk with your manager and say, hey, I need access to this. I need access to, give me the type of projects, or help me find the type of projects that will take me to that next level. And sometimes your team may not just have that type of project. And then that's when you then realize that, hey, I need to be out of here completely, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to grow here. But ultimately, my mental model as it comes to promotions is 3 things, right? You have to show impact, right? Whatever you're doing, there has to be value that comes out of it.
Yeah.
Impact, influence,
Yes.
and ownership, right? And those 3 things, right? Ownership, impact, and influence. I actually made a full YouTube video about those 3 things, but
Must watch.
yeah. But at whatever level that you're at, obviously it kind of depends, but those are the 3 main things. And you have to kind of like work with your manager, work with your team, or work with whoever is in charge in your team. Because as I think I said this in the previous episode, some teams, the manager has the power. In some teams, the principal or like the higher up engineers, they have the power. So you kind of like work with them to basically align to say, okay, hey, this is the type of projects that I want to work on, right? This is where I want to go.
Yeah.
I want to get this thing. Will this project take me there? If it's a yes, great. Let us continue working on it. If it's not, tell me what is going to take me there. Right? Yeah.
So Umar just mentioned his mental models for this: ownership, influence, and impact.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different ladder.
Yeah.
The way I think about it is before you become a senior, a lot of what they want to see is autonomy. So I'm not opposing yours. I'm saying before you become a senior, they want to see autonomy. They want to see, hey, go do this. And then by yourself, you figure out how to do this, right? And then you get it done. At around senior, they want to see that you can align multiple people to get something done, right? So you're like, oh, talk to team A, do this thing. Talk to team E, to do this thing. Above that, they want to see influence. So influence is, and this is where I'm learning, and this is where I'm growing right now, is influence is saying, hey, you know what? We need to get this thing done, but it's going to take X number of years. But then I need to sell the idea of where we are going to all of my customers so that they are ready to move. But I also understand what their problems are. I need to go to the platform or the infra team and tell them, hey, like this is our long-term stuff. And then I also need to go to the people that send me stuff and then get them on the same page. But that influence to go like take something and then go and make it happen, right? That I think is the difference between, like, as you progress your career, first you become you have a lot of autonomy. Then you have what's the second one?
Impact.
Yes, you have impact, and then the last one, like, you have influence.
Yeah.
You could essentially just say, like, we need to get this done, and then just go wrangle everybody, and then you can see like autonomy, software engineer only. The next level, software engineer does matter, but software engineer, like writing really good code does matter, but other things start to matter, right?
Absolutely.
But when you're going beyond a senior, PMing matters.
Yeah.
Like you're a PM. You're essentially like people take an idea and then they toss it at you, and then you battle and you figure out like, hey, this is how to get there. This is all the people that we need to collaborate with, and then you start to drive stuff.
Yeah.
But like that transition, I think, is something that is always very hard for engineers because you could write, and this is something I struggle with a lot, and I struggle with. I've tried to get promoted to principal a few times now, and it's something I've struggled with, and it's the influence thing. It's like, hey, like I have this idea in my head. how do I communicate it? How do I write it down? How do I make a roadmap of where we need to go? How do I drop design documents? How do I break it into stages so that, like, not just stages as well, stages that people can say, oh, there is a valid deliverable at stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. You can't say at stage 1 there is nothing that business will get value out of. I think something I've also had to learn as well.
Yeah.
You say, oh, stage 1, we can only solve this very small problem, or we can only move this feature to this like front end thing to depend on this thing for phase 1.
Yeah.
Phase 2, we can move these 5 things.
Yeah.
And then some final stage. But what that does for people above you is it de-risks the project.
Yeah.
Because they know if stage 1 is successful, maybe stage 2 will be successful. Maybe like, and you can get incremental successes. But yeah, that's my own mental model of how I think about like the transition that happens as you get promoted.
Absolutely. I think it's you basically hit on a lot of important aspects. I think one part that I want to add to is like the influence that you get from working with other people or getting people to buy into your idea is also very, very important. But at the same time, I think one thing I understood very early is everyone has their own agenda.
Yes.
Right? Everyone has their own agenda.
Yes.
There are people whose agenda is, listen, I just want to coast.
Yes.
Right? I don't want to do any work.
Yep.
Right? Like I don't want to do any, like this vision that you're trying to get us to, all I hear is extra work, is extra this thing, late hours, this thing, and they don't want to do it, right?
Yes.
There are people who on the other end of things, they're trying to get their own promotions as well.
Yes.
So they have the vision that you just mentioned, and some of it may not have been fleshed out.
Yeah.
And they know they're working on some other important things as well, but then they're looking for people to help them flesh them out.
Yes.
But ultimately, that thing may or may not lead to somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you're now spending your time doing that, right, you're kind of like then helping them see their thing through. And it's important to kind of like realize which work is important towards your route or towards your journey to like being promoted. Because I said it because when I first joined my team, fresh out of college, I was working with this principal engineer. He had this, as you said, he wasn't thinking just small. He was thinking like, okay, let's make this dashboard for networking engineers across the whole organization to make changes to their network devices. Yes. I was like, absolutely great.
Yes.
He needed a software engineer to help him work on it. I'm like, hey, I'm your guy.
Yeah.
I started working on this thing. I did demos with him. I showed the team. I told my manager from time to time, I am working on this thing in addition to, like small other things here and there, right? And then I think I spent like 6 months to a year working on this thing. Finally done. I showed them. They were like, oh, it's great. Everything works well. It's great. And I was like, okay, when are we going to ship this thing and then have people start using it? And they were like, oh, no. We're not going to ship it. I was like,
what?
Yeah, what? Like,
what?
What do you mean we're not going to ship it? They were like, yeah, it's just a proof of concept. But then when I was working on it, I didn't know it was just a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Right? If I had known at the time, there was more important work that I could have been aligning myself to.
Yes.
And I also didn't take time to speak with my manager and tell him, yo, this thing that I'm doing, this thing that I'm spending hours on, this thing that I'm grinding on, will this thing get me to that next level, right? Yeah. How important is this thing in your eye, right? And if I had done those things, then would I have worked on that thing? Maybe not.
Yes.
But ultimately, at the end of that 6 months, I found that my time was somewhat wasted. I did learn, but in the grand scheme of things, because obviously I was trying to get to that next level, if you don't have those conversations and then understand that, okay, hey, everybody has their own agenda and how you fit into that agenda, it's important. And if you don't have your own agenda, people will start to use you within their own agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like the example you gave, right?
Yeah.
What if the principal left, right? Like, so you spent 6 months, 9 months, that was your project of pride.
Yeah.
And he leaves. Of course, it's not going to get shipped any longer, right? It probably won't get shipped.
Exactly.
But you spent all this time. And that goes back to something we spoke about when we were talking about like collaboration with your manager. Mm-hmm. You want your manager to be very, very clear about what he knows, what the impact of the work you're doing is to business, right? So you could have a conversation about like, oh yeah, so this thing I'm building, right? How does it impact who the customer is, other network engineers? Mm-hmm. This thing I'm building, how does it impact her, like whoever your customer persona is? Mm-hmm. How does it help them do better? How does it make them more efficient? Mm-hmm. But if you don't get all those things, if it is all fluff and you're not getting a what next, this is what is going to happen. If you're not aligned on those things, you can spend a lot of your energy and your time working on people's pet projects. Or you might spend, like, so for example, I spent a couple of months last year trying to sell my team on doing something that I would say was a lot of money. What if you're working somewhere that money doesn't matter?
Yeah.
You'll be like, oh, we'll save you $300,000. Your manager doesn't really care. Maybe it values velocity. Maybe, for example, you're in a startup where like money doesn't matter. It is like finding product market fit that matters. And like just you might burn as much money as possible until it works. In that mode, talking about like saving money doesn't really get you anywhere, right? So it's like that balance of aligning what does your manager think is important and getting that clarity from him.
Yeah. I think it goes back to understanding the impact of your work, right? And talking to your manager about that impact, right? Just be like, yo, I think I do this not every one-on-one. I wouldn't advise to do this every one-on-one, but maybe every few one-on-ones, right?
Yes.
If you're on track to get that promotion, ask him, hey, this work that I'm doing, will it get me the promotion? Will it take me to that next level?
Yes.
If they say no, then you know how to think about the work, right? Ask him, all right, what will I do to get to that next level? What work will I do? Because I kid you not, these conversations are being had.
Yeah.
People are having these conversations with your manager, right?
Yes.
That person who they keep assigning the top project to is not necessarily because he's the most capable. It's because in the back he has probably said, listen, this is what I want, right?
Yeah.
And he is showing up and he's saying, hey, give me this thing.
Yes.
Give me this hard work. Give me this like impactful work. And you, because you're not having those conversations, you're getting the busy work.
Yeah.
The busy work that you are grinding, you they walk, you they sweat, but there is no output. Right? You are refining code bases, you are refactoring, like you're working on things that are already working. And so when you then go to write the impact of your work, it's just fluff, right? There isn't value, or there isn't measurable value that is important to the company that's coming out of that work.
The other thing is somebody else on your team might be delivering MVPs, and then they deliver an MVP, and this is one of those insidious things. Someone delivers an MVP, and then he says a class of problems are solved. But that MVP doesn't go to production. But at MVP delivery, it gets all of the credit for that complex work. But you that take it to production, you get no credit.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that does happen as well. So it's part of the thing where if that is what, like, somebody has to do MVP, another person has to do this thing.
Yeah.
What you want to do is make sure that what you're working on is important and aligned with the growth that you want, that your manager is giving you, that you need to grow in this way to get your promotion.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's the most glamorous work or not. That's a different story. But you need to get it. And also, like, not just even your manager, because I think one of the things that I've learned is also, like, your manager is one person on, like, especially as you get higher. Like, so before you make senior, maybe your manager might almost be able to singularly promote you. Maybe at least before mid-level, they'll probably singularly promote you. At a particular level, not just your manager any longer, right? It becomes a director or a senior director, a VP that has to approve your promotion. And in that case, your manager can promise you a lot in truth, but the person that's going to approve is not your manager. It is your manager's manager, or it is your manager's manager's manager. And in those scenarios, goes back to something that Umar talks about a lot. You want to not just network with your manager, you also want to start talking to your skip.
Yeah.
And depends on your level, your skip's manager once in a while as well. Put something on his calendar once every couple of months and say, hey, this is what is important. This is how I'm thinking about it. Because in reality, you will do the work. It might be the exact same thing that you're going to do is what you're going to continue doing. But when your skip's manager, has seen you and had conversations with you before, often or once in a while, it comes to his head that, oh, I gave this person this thing and it delivered. So I can trust him with more important things. In reality, because he has never been the one that gave you that work, it doesn't understand that he can trust you, even though your manager completely 100% trusts you. Your manager's manager completely 100% trusts you. People need to trust you to delegate work to you. And like building that connection and that FaceTime so that they can delegate like important things to you. I think like that's the kind of thing that you also have to be very, very considerate about.
I completely agree. I think when it comes to bonuses as well, well as promotions as well, what typically happens is in certain companies, I know I'm saying certain companies, like everyone doesn't know where I work. At Microsoft, what would happen is they wouldn't say this, but they're comparing you to other engineers on your level in different teams.
Yes.
Right? So if somebody else from a different team that's on your level is doing more, like is doing a higher impact work, or is more visible, or like the scale of the problems you're solving is different from yours, then technically speaking, and that person is getting promotion, for example,
Yeah.
it may be harder for your manager to then go in that room where there are 5 or 6 managers, because what happens is there's only room for so many promotions during like a specific cycle.
Yeah.
And everybody is bringing their own people who they want to promote,
Yeah.
right? So if you don't equip your manager
Yes.
with that information
Yeah.
from the brag sheet, and if you don't know what a brag sheet is, go watch the episode before this one.
Yeah.
We talk about a brag sheet. If you
Episode
don't,
8.
yeah, episode 8. But in short form, a brag sheet is just a list of all the accomplishments that you've made, and as you make them, and the work you did, how you did it, the impact that came out of it, right?
Yeah.
And you, Seth, read that brag sheet,
Oh yeah.
right? Is it making sense, right? Are you providing value, right? And that's an internal conversation that you then need to have with yourself, right? Can I be doing more? Because ultimately, at the end of the day is going to end. But that's a conversation for a different day. At the end of the day, you have to provide value.
Oh yeah.
You have to provide value. Now, that value differs based on this thing, but it has to be value that is important to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I think is very important though is, when you move to America to work, you feel like, you have to get all the promotion in the world. Well, in reality, like a promotion is a choice.
Yeah.
So do you want the promotion? And it's not just do you want the promotion. I think the other thing is, especially in a bigger company, you can see people that are at the level you want to grow to. Do you want what they have to do?
Yeah.
Do you want, because and don't just think about the glamorous stuff as well.
Yeah. Don't think about the money. Don't think about it. Then they walk.
Yeah. If you look at it, like obviously if you're in a place where, like people get promoted and they coast. Yeah. But I think if you've left a terminal level, so a terminal level in tech, essentially, like in most tech companies, they want to see you make senior in the first maybe 7 years. If you don't make seniors after 7 years, they might want to fire you. But after you've hit your terminal level in your company, right? Then you ask yourself, hey, do I actually want to grow? Because growth is a choice.
Yeah.
And like when you say, hey, manager, I want to grow, obviously that's when all of this stuff you're talking about comes into play.
Yeah.
But in reality, you have that choice to say, hey, you know what? This extra time, I want to spend it on doing a startup. I want to spend it on
My children, family.
yeah. So it's a choice as well. But like, don't also feel like you have to be stampeded on the promotion path, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
be deliberate about that choice.
Yeah.
And then when you make the choice, make sure that your manager is willing to help you make that
Informed,
choice. Yeah.
absolutely.
So you're like, don't like if you're working at a particular pace, if you're like, okay, you know what, I have the next like a year or two to my kids like my kids are gonna be done with like kindergarten in a year or two. And you know what, you're gonna be more autonomous, or we're gonna get like a living au pair, and then I can focus more on work. Yeah, like plan for this and be like, hey manager, like in a year or in 6 months, I'm gonna be wanting to get a promotion. So or like I'm gonna start work for a promotion. What do I have to do? Because when you give him that warning, he starts to think about it. But also the other thing to also remember is that like the way your manager phrases or sells an idea is also how people think about the impact. Well, it's a balancing act, obviously. But sometimes like if somebody says, hey, the impact of this thing is ABC, and then sells it well, but someone that says, well, the impact is just something minor.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't articulate the impact very clearly, the same work might lead you to be thought of as like this versus this, like the same like importance of like a feature, for example.
Yeah.
But in reality, if it is not sold to people as this is at this level of importance,
Yeah.
they might just go, it's just throwaway work. They might not value it very, very clearly. So you have to be very deliberate about that.
Yeah, that's very true. I think, as we wrap up this episode, I think one thing that has stood out to me is through my career so far about, Promoted is just being intentional.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Being intentional. I've been privileged that I haven't had to fight for it, right?
Yes.
Like the work that I've done has gradually, or has not gradually, the work that I've done has just helped me get to that next level naturally because I was performing at that next level.
Yeah.
But I know that with every other thing that I've wanted, I have had to talk. I've had to deliberately have that conversation and say, hey, this is what I want. And ultimately doing the work.
Yeah.
That's the first part. And secondly, making sure that the outcome of that work is important to the people that care.
Oh, yes.
That's my major takeaway about getting promoted, right? There's ownership, impact, and influence. But ultimately, do those three things and make sure the people who care about them can see it. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. What's yours?
Yeah, mine, autonomy, alignment, and influence.
Yeah.
But like, you need to remember that like, if you want a promotion, like obviously secure the bag, get more money. But like, if you want a promotion, just think about where you are in your career and how those things might be very useful. And then just go after it. Let your manager and let your manager's manager know that this is what you're going for. And then go after it and give it your best shot. And we're no longer in 2022 where you could be like, oh, I'm leaving, and they have to force you to they'll try to match it. But honestly, I think if you have a lot of impact, if you actually get to a point where you think that things aren't working out for you, if your impact is really high, they might be more considerate to, if you want to pull that gun. And it's also people like want, really.
Yeah, for sure.
But
and
if you want to do
pull
that
gun, make sure you're ready to shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a conversation we'll have a different day. But if you pull that gun, make sure it's locked and loaded, and you will shoot it if it doesn't happen. But good luck with navigating the promotion journey, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you very much. Bye.